On this Shabbat, we've turned our attention as a community to one of many growing problems in our country, and standing up for those in our community and beyond in the LGBTQ plus community. And I want to thank our committee, co-chaired by Doreen Grossman and Lori Schechner, members of it, Mayor Scher, Rachel Grossman, Ellen Mazow, Kate Herman Wu, Elsa Herman Wu, Laurel Brody, Barbara Neustadt, Judy Cantor, and Debbie Levine, and myself. Really proud of the work that we've done over the years. Lori and I met and said that this is what we call a shata dechak in the tradition. This is a time for action. This is a time to really work hard. And while we always work hard during Pride Month, we wanted our community to focus on this. We're very pleased to have a guest speaker, Rebecca Miner, who is a Jewish queer clinician, consultant, educator, and expert in gender-affirming care. As a gender specialist, Rebecca partners with trans and gender nonconforming youth through their journeys and serves as a guide to their parents. She's co-founder of Prism Therapy Collective. She is also an adjunct faculty and lecturer at BU's School of Social Work and provided cultural responsiveness training and consultation to many different organizations, schools, and businesses for the past decade. She's authored articles on LGBTQ plus youth and contributed to textbooks. She is the author of the forthcoming book, Raising Trans Kids, What to Expect When You Were Not Expecting This. Welcome very much. You should pick up. Just make sure.
Great. Can you all hear me? Wonderful. Okay. So, on this morning, of all mornings, we ask, why should Jews care about anti-trans legislation? Why should we, as a people who have faced centuries of oppression, stand up for the rights and dignity of trans people today? Because our tradition demands it. Judaism teaches us a justice rooted in empathy. Rabbi Emanuel Rockman calls this empathic justice. Our history has instilled in us the ability to see the suffering of others and to make their plight our own. We know what it means to be othered, to be stripped of our rights, to have laws enacted against our very existence. And because of that, we cannot sit idly by while others endure the same. We are living at a time where state after state is enacting executive orders and legislative bans that target trans individuals, particularly trans youth. In 2025 alone, over 20 states have issued or reinforced orders restricting gender-affirming care, banning trans athletes, and eliminating basic protections in education, healthcare, and public life. These policies are not just theoretical. They are causing harm. Studies show that trans youth who are denied access to gender-affirming care face significantly higher rates of depression and suicidal ideation. In fact, 4 times the national average. More than half of trans adults report being denied or delayed care by healthcare providers due to their gender identity. And despite what opponents claim, less than 1% of those who transition medically regret this decision. Less than 1%. That's less than a hip replacement. These attacks are not just coming at the state level. We're living in a time when the President of the United States is using anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and Nazi-era symbols, fueling hatred and enacting executive orders that systematically strip trans people of their rights. Again, this is not just policy. This is an orchestrated attack on an entire community. The dehumanization of trans people through legislation, executive action, and propaganda is a direct threat. And history has taught us that dehumanization is the first step towards far worse atrocities. In the past few weeks, several executive orders have been issued that significantly impact LGBTQ plus individuals. I promise I won't bore you with too much legislative jargon, but just to make sure we're all on the same page about what's happening, I'm going to explain a few of the latest executive orders so we're all on the same page. On January 20th, there was one that was made to define gender as binary. Right? President Donald Trump signed an executive order called Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth. It's not my truth. There's another on January 28th, just 1 week later, restricting gender-affirming care for minors. An executive order called Protecting Children from Chemical and Surgical Mutilation was signed, prohibiting gender-affirming care, while at the same time, every single medical association in the United States and the World Health Association all agree that gender-affirming care is life-saving care. Thank you. Then, on January 27th, there was one banning trans people from being in the military service. Then, just later, eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Some of you have worked really hard to increase DEI in both this space and perhaps in your other community spaces and businesses, and yet we have a president who is trying to erase that work. Lastly, there was a restriction on gender marker changes on federal documents, meaning people who wanted to update their passports or make sure that their documentation matched their identity are no longer able to do so. Makes me think of my grandmother before she passed. She asked us to update her passport. We said, "Grammy, why? You can't travel anymore." You know, she was quite limited at this point. And she said, "The people who had papers were the ones who got out." Just this week, Representative Sarah McBride, is the first trans state senator in the US, was openly misgendered during congressional proceedings. It was our own state representative, Bill Keating, who stood up for her and corrected this. Yes. Yes. Meanwhile, states like Texas are attempting to pass laws that would classify trans identity as fraud. And it would be a felony to identify as trans. It would also be a felony for someone like me to provide gender-affirming care, in which I would have to serve time. If passed, oh wait, I said that. Loving parents of trans youth have been threatened with the loss of custody for simply affirming their child's identity. These legislative attacks are not just dangerous, they are designed to instill fear and force trans people out of public life entirely. It's easy for us to think, oh, that's something that happens in Florida or something that happens in Texas. But we're not safe from that necessarily here in our East Coast liberal bubble. This matters because as Jews, we have an obligation to care. Because LGBTQ plus young people and their families and their medical providers are under legislative attack. Because the suicide rate is alarmingly high. Because trans people, especially trans women of color, face disproportionate violence and discrimination. Because conversion therapy remains legal in more than half of the United States. I don't know if many of you are aware of that, but that remains the case. Nationally, about 40% of trans youth report being bullied at school, which is nearly twice their cisgender peers. In Massachusetts, K through 12 schools, about 20% of trans and non-conforming youth report being misgendered by not just their peers, but also their teachers. Because 1 in 6 Gen Z adults are part of the LGBTQ plus community. Because the future is non-binary, with over 1.2 million people in the US identifying as non-binary, and young people are leading the way. So we have to catch up. Familial and community acceptance results in significantly increased self-esteem and overall well-being. Right? So some of these statistics I'm sharing with you are very scary, but I want you to remember this one. It only takes one supportive adult in any role. You can be a neighbor, a friend, a person here. One supportive adult reduces the risk of an LGBTQ plus young person's suicide rate by 40%. and you can be that person. Now, what does the Torah tell us? I'm no rabbi, but I'll give it my best shot. In the book of Genesis, Jacob has his famous vision of the angels climbing a ladder to heaven. And God stood beside him and said, "Know that I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go." Jacob woke from his sleep and said, "Surely God is in this place." And I did not know it. Shaken, he said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the abode of God, and that is the gateway to heaven." Jacob named this site Bethel, but previously, the city had been named Luz. Jacob's renaming is not uncommon to the Torah, and it is actually central in Jewish tradition. The story often goes the trials and tribulations on the journey, and then the blessings, and then the renaming of the location or the self to mark the occasion. Vinnie Prell wrote, "Taking on a new name or a pronoun marks the moment when we gather up the courage and the vision to embrace the image of God inside us. It is a moment of empowerment, a moment of being at home in oneself. Because surely God is in this place." In this story, Jacob teaches us that the way to change the world is to see holiness, to name it, and to never forget. So let us see the holiness in each other and respect the name we give ourselves. Avram, Judaism's first leader, was given the name Avraham, right, to mark a significant transition. God told him to lech lecha from your birthplace and your father's house. It's often understood as go forth, though some say a more accurate translation is to go to yourself. Much like transition or a coming out, for Avraham, this journey was both deeply personal and also public. He transformed from the person he was to the person he was meant to be, the father of the Jewish people. Another significant name change in the Torah is that of Jacob, or Yaakov, to Yisrael. Yaakov became Yisrael, meaning struggle with God after wrestling with an angel and prevailing. Rabbinical student Heather Paul wrote, "Jewish rituals do not just mark change, they effect change. And a name change should do just that, just as it did for Avram and Yaakov." There are people of all ages in this congregation, and certainly in your communities, who need you to interrogate your long-held beliefs about gender and sexuality and support them in their journeys of becoming. The fight for trans rights is that of a broader struggle for bodily autonomy. We've seen increasing government overreach into decisions about our own bodies, from abortion bans to restrictions on reproductive care to laws policing gender identity. Jewish law prioritizes bodily autonomy, right? The Talmud teaches us that a person should have ownership over their own body. Decisions about our bodies, whether that's medical care, reproductive choices, or gender identity, should not be dictated by the state. They belong to the individual, their doctors, and their loved ones. So we cannot discuss these issues without acknowledging the rise in anti-Semitism. Hate does not exist in isolation. The same ideologies that are fueling anti-trans policies are also fueling anti-Semitism, racism, and xenophobia. White nationalist groups are actively targeting both Jewish and LGBTQ+ communities, framing both as threats to traditional society. The rhetoric used against trans people today, accusing them of corrupting children, eroding family values, or being part of an agenda, is eerily similar to the language we've seen used against Jews throughout history. Our safety is interconnected. If we do not stand for others, who will stand for us? So, what can we do? We can educate ourselves. We can learn about the issues. We can follow trans advocates, read their work, and listen to their experiences. We can show up, like you all did today. We can attend protests. We can call lawmakers and support trans-led organizations. We can consider donating to organizations that provide legal support and direct aid towards trans individuals and their families. Right now, Keshet has started a fund to help families who are having to relocate so that they are able to access the life-saving medical care that their children and families deserve. We can speak out. We can challenge misinformation when you hear it and have conversations with those close to you, family, friends, and colleagues, and push for policies in our workplaces and communities that support inclusivity and safety. We can create safe spaces. Whether it's in our synagogues, schools, homes, or workplaces, we can ensure that all LGBTQ+ Jews feel valued, heard, supported, and paid for their labor. This can be as simple as sharing your pronouns and asking for and respecting someone else's, making sure bathrooms are accessible, or advocating for affirming policies in local institutions. If you're wondering where to start, here's something small but powerful. Reach out to a trans person in your life. Or if you know a parent of a trans person, they may need some support right now, and they are often overlooked. Let them know that they are not alone. The Torah teaches us that we must pursue justice, not when it is convenient, not when it is popular, but always. To be Jewish is to stand against oppression. To be Jewish is to refuse silence in the face of injustice. So may we rise to this call as our ancestors have before us. And may we be the people who ensure that all are seen, all are honored, and all are free.
Rebecca will be having a conversation during Kiddush, about 12:45, is that right? And there's a sheet of actions that you can take. Very proud of the work our community has already done, and your inspiring words certainly motivate me, and I hope everyone to take further actions.